Some men spend their whole lives waiting for the right moment to speak. I spent mine staying quiet, letting the work speak instead. Right up until the morning my daughter called me from a parking lot in the middle of a Tuesday, trying very hard not to cry into the phone. Remember that. Because everything that follows only makes sense if you understand that about me first. Welcome to Dad's Cold Revenge. Grab yourself a coffee, find a comfortable chair, and keep in mind that the people in these stories had every opportunity to conduct themselves with dignity. They just decided not to. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and make sure you're subscribed. You're going to want to stay for this one. It was a Tuesday in late November. The kind of morning that settles over southern Ontario like a gray wool blanket. Not storming, not snowing, just low and heavy and cold in a way that gets into your joints before you've even had your first cup. I was in my workshop behind the house in Port Hope, finishing a set of cabinet doors I'd been hand-fitting for 3 weeks, when my phone buzzed against the workbench. My daughter. Calling at 10:15 on a Tuesday. She teaches school. She's never free at 10:15 on a Tuesday. I picked up on the second ring. Dad. Just that one word. And I already knew. There's a particular sound a person makes when they're holding themselves together with everything they have. It's not crying. It's the thing that comes just before crying, when the jaw is tight, and the breath is shallow, and the voice is smaller than usual, like they're trying to take up less space in their own body so the grief doesn't spill out. My daughter made that sound. Hey. I kept my voice steady. What happened? She told me she was in the staff parking lot at the school, that she'd stepped outside between classes because she couldn't hold it together in front of 30 grade 4 students, and she needed to hear my voice. She told me that her husband had called her an hour ago, that he'd been asked to leave his position at Halton Meridian Development, effective immediately, that the call had come from the regional director, that her father-in-law had arranged it. I set down my wood plane very slowly and carefully on the workbench. He arranged it, I said. He told them Stuart wasn't leadership material, she said. He's been saying it to anyone who would listen, apparently, for months. He told them Stuart was holding the team back, that his judgment was a liability. He's been working there for 7 years, Dad. 7 years, I know. And then she said the part that I will not forget for as long as I live. He told Stuart's mother that he'd made a mistake, letting his son marry into our family, that we weren't the kind of people they needed around them anymore. That our name didn't, she stopped, collected herself, that our name didn't carry the right kind of weight. I sat down on the stool beside my workbench. Our name, I said. Yeah. I looked out the small window at the back of the workshop. The yard was frozen, the old maple bare, a thin skim of ice on the bird bath. 43 years I'd lived in this town. 43 years of that yard, that maple, that bird bath that my wife picked out the summer before she passed. Our name. Where are you right now? I asked, still in the parking lot. Stuart's at home with the kids. She exhaled. He's not doing well, Dad. Okay. I stood up. Tell him not to make any calls. Don't touch the email. Don't talk to anyone from the company. Don't do anything. Tell him to give me 24 hours. Dad, what are you going to 24 hours? Can you trust me on that? A pause. Then quietly, yeah, good. Go back to your class. Your students need you. I'll call you tonight. I hung up, sat there for a moment in the quiet of the workshop, wood shavings on the floor, the smell of cedar and linseed oil, the low hum of the space heater in the corner. A normal Tuesday morning, the kind I'd had 1,000 of. His name was Gerald Ashworth, my daughter's father-in-law, a man who'd sat across my dining room table on Christmas Eve 3 years in a row, eaten my wife's recipe for butter tarts, and nodded along pleasantly while I told stories about the early years. A man who had, at his son's wedding rehearsal dinner, shaken my hand and said he was glad the families were joined. I'd smiled and meant it. He hadn't. I found that out gradually, the way you find most things out, not all at once, but in small moments that you file away without knowing why. The comment at Thanksgiving about Stuart needing to think bigger than his current position. The offhand remark to my daughter about Port Hope being a fine town to grow up in, but perhaps not the most ambitious address for a young couple with potential. The way Gerald would steer conversations at family dinners toward the Ashworth family business, its reach, its reputation, always circling back to legacy the way a man does when he wants you to understand that his legacy is the one that counts. I'd filed all of it away. Now I understood why. I closed up the workshop and went inside, made a fresh pot of coffee, sat at the kitchen table where I'd sat every morning for 4 decades and opened my laptop. Then I picked up a different phone. The one I kept in the kitchen drawer, next to the good scissors and the spare set of house keys. The one with a different number. The one I used for Caldwell Ridge. My operations director answered before the second ring. 41 years old, originally from Thunder Bay, had been with me for 16 years and knew the difference between a routine call and a call that meant something was moving. He knew because I'd trained him to know. Morning, he said carefully. Pull the Ashworth file, I said, the full supplier agreement. He was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. The Gerald Ashworth file? Ashworth Materials? That's the one. There was the sound of keys, a brief pause. They're mid-contract, 14 months remaining. Aggregate supply value, looking at about 2.8 million over the term. Stone, aggregate, engineered fill. We use them on the Simcoe County project and the Barry infill. 2.8 million, I said. That's right. I looked at the kitchen window, at the gray November sky outside. Gerald Ashworth had spent the better part of a year quietly dismantling my son-in-law's career. Calling him unfit for leadership to anyone who would listen. Pulling strings with a regional director. Pushing his own son toward walking away from the marriage. And the entire time, he had been cashing supply contracts that ran through my company. Caldwell Ridge Construction and Development, 41 years in business. Projects across the Golden Horseshoe from Oshawa to Barrie to the edge of Muskoka. The company whose name was on the deed of the building Gerald had been supplying for 3 years. He called my family's name unworthy, while depositing check as signed by my accountant. I almost laughed. Almost. Don't cancel the contract, I said. Okay. Restructure it. I want a formal vendor performance review initiated. Pull the clause from Section 5, the standard evaluation trigger. Draft a notice. Professional language, nothing aggressive. Caldwell Ridge is conducting a routine supplier assessment, effective immediately. All payment disbursements paused pending the outcome. 30 days to respond. He'd gone very still on the line. That's a significant disruption for them at this stage of the Simcoe schedule. I know it is. Who did we recently bring in to head up our supplier relations portfolio? He paused. We don't have a dedicated head for that. We've been running it through procurement. We do as of this morning, I said. Draw up an offer letter. Director of Supplier Relations. I want it ready by noon. He asked a question he already knew the answer to. Who's it for? I looked at the photograph on the kitchen windowsill. My daughter on her wedding day, her husband beside her, both of them squinting into the summer sun, laughing at something just outside the frame. Good people. Honest people. People who showed up and worked hard and trusted that it would be enough. My son-in-law, I said. Stuart. The offer went together by noon. The evaluation notice went to Ashworth Materials by end of day. I called Stuart that evening. He answered on the third ring, his voice flat in that particular way exhaustion flattens a voice. Not defeated exactly, just temporarily emptied out. I've been sitting here trying to figure out what I did wrong, he said, before I could say anything. 7 years. I hit every target they gave me. I brought in 3 major accounts in the last 2 years alone. And 1 phone call from his father and it's just gone. I know, I said. I don't understand what I did to make him. Stuart, I said his name the way I used to when he'd first started coming around for Sunday dinners, still figuring out how to talk to me. Quiet, direct. Listen to me carefully. You didn't do anything wrong. What happened to you has nothing to do with your performance and everything to do with Gerald's pride. Do you understand the difference? Silence. There's a difference between being found lacking and being found inconvenient, I said. Gerald didn't push you out because you failed. He pushed you out because you succeeded, and it wasn't in a way that benefited him. That's his failure, not yours. More silence. Then, okay, I need you in Barrie tomorrow, my office at Caldwell Ridge. 9 o'clock, business dress, Barrie. He paused. What, why? Because you're starting a new job, and I'd like to show you where it is. Another long pause, then quietly. I didn't know you had an office in Barrie. I smiled at the kitchen window. I have offices in 4 cities, son. You've just never had reason to come to one before. I hung up before he could find the words to ask the next question. Some things a man needs to see before he can understand them. He was at the office at 10 to 9. I watched from the 2nd floor as he came through the main entrance, a low, modern building on Dunlop Street East, tasteful signage, nothing flashy. Caldwell Ridge Construction and Development. He stood in the lobby for a moment, looking up at the ceiling, at the floor plan framed on the wall, at the site photographs from 30 years of projects across Ontario. Then he looked around slowly, the way a person does when the room they're standing in doesn't match the map in their head. My assistant brought him up. When he walked into my office, He looked like a man doing mathematics he wasn't prepared for. He looked at me. He looked at the window behind me, which faced the yard where 4 of our fleet trucks were parked. He looked at the framed certificates on the wall, the Order of Merit from the Ontario Home Builders Association, the Conservation Commendation from Georgian Bay, a certificate of excellence from a hospital expansion project we'd completed in 2018. "You own this," he said. It wasn't a question exactly. It was more like a statement he was testing out loud to see if it would hold. 41 years, I said. He sat down across from me without being asked. His hands were in his lap. He said nothing for a moment, which told me a lot about him. A lesser man would have filled the silence with words. Stuart sat with it. "Why didn't you ever?" He stopped. "Reorganized. Why didn't you tell us?" I poured 2 coffees from the thermos on the desk and slid one across. My father built a small lumber business outside of Peterborough when I was young. He was the most trusted man in his community. Everyone knew Jim Caldwell. Everyone knew what he'd built. And the moment people understood what it was worth, they understood something different about him. Not better, just different. The relatives who came out of the woodwork. The friends who became a little less easy. The neighbors who suddenly had ideas about partnerships and opportunities. I picked up my coffee. He lost the business. Not all at once, but slowly, in ways that were hard to trace. People he trusted got close to it, and what they saw when they got close changed the way they behaved. I watched that happen when I was 12 years old, and I made a decision that I've kept for 4 decades. The people in my life would know me before they knew what I had. And what I had, I would protect by keeping it quiet. Stuart looked at me steadily. "I wasn't hiding it from you out of distrust," I said. "I was protecting it the only way I knew how. You and my daughter, you built your life on your own terms, on your own merit. That matters to me more than you know." He looked at the window for a moment, then back at me. "What's the job?" he asked. I pulled 3 folders from the desk and set them in front of him. Financials, org chart, and the Ashworth Materials supplier file. He picked up the 3rd one. I watched his face as he read the cover sheet, watched the stillness that came over him when he registered the company name. "That's Gerald's aggregate business," he said. "It is. He supplies you. He has for 3 years. His company provides stone and engineered fill for 2 active Caldwell Ridge projects. The contracts run through our procurement office." He looked up. "He's never known who owns this company." Stuart set the folder down on the desk very carefully. "You're telling me that while Gerald was making calls to get me fired, and encouraging your wife to question the marriage," I said, "and telling people our family name didn't carry the right kind of weight." Stuart's jaw tightened. "He was depositing checks from your company." The room was very quiet. "What's in the other folders?" he asked. The 2nd folder had the vendor evaluation notice. The 3rd had his offer letter. Director of Supplier Relations, Caldwell Ridge Construction and Development. Base compensation, car allowance, benefits. The kind of package that would have made his former salary look like something he'd already moved past. His hands were very still on the desk. "I've never done supplier relations," he said. "You've spent 7 years managing accounts worth 8 figures," I said. "You know how to read a contract, you know how to manage a professional relationship, and you know how to handle a difficult counterpart with your dignity intact. I've seen all 3 in you at my own kitchen table." He looked up. "The rest I'll teach you." He stared at the offer letter for a long time. "When Gerald gets that evaluation notice," he said slowly, "he's going to start making calls. He's going to ask around. He already has the first message on his voicemail," I said. "I expect he'll trace it back within the week. And then," I leaned back in my chair, "and then he's going to need to come and sit across from you." The silence that followed was the most settled I'd felt in years. Stuart picked up the pen from my desk, signed the offer letter, set it back down. The Ashworth Materials evaluation notice had gone out the previous afternoon. By the following morning, Gerald had called the main Caldwell Ridge line twice. He hadn't reached me. He reached our receptionist, who took his name and number and told him someone would be in touch. Standard procedure. He left 2 more messages by Thursday. Stuart was already in the Barrie office by then, working through the supplier files with our procurement manager, asking the right questions, listening more than he spoke. I stopped in at noon and found him at the boardroom table with a yellow legal pad and 3 open binders, his jacket on the back of the chair, sleeves rolled up, reading glasses on. He looked up when I came in. "Ashworth's aggregate pricing is 15% above market rate on 2 of the 3 product categories," he said. "Has been since renewal last year. I know, you knew. I noticed it at renewal. I allowed the contract to proceed as. He looked at me. Why? Because the time wasn't right, I said. Now it is. He looked back at the binders. A moment passed. Then, when is the meeting? Friday afternoon, I said. 2 o'clock. Gerald has confirmed. Stuart nodded slowly. He didn't ask if I would be there. He already knew the answer. I watched from the hallway, not because I didn't trust my son-in-law. I trusted him completely. I stood in the hallway because the meeting was his, not mine. I'd built the room. He was the one who had to walk into it. Gerald Ashworth arrived 8 minutes early, which told me something. A man who arrives 8 minutes early to a meeting he didn't request is a man who has spent the intervening days recalibrating and hasn't quite found his footing yet. He came in with his operations manager, a man named Ted I'd seen at the odd industry function over the years. Gerald was in a charcoal overcoat, silver hair swept back, the practiced ease of a man who considers himself comfortable in boardrooms. He looked around the room as he settled in, looked at the project photographs on the wall, looked at the Caldwell Ridge letterhead on the folders laid out on the table. Stuart was already standing when they entered, not behind the table, standing near the window, looking out at the yard, coffee in hand. He turned when they came in. Gerald. He gestured toward the chairs. Thanks for making the drive. Have a seat. Gerald sat. His operations manager sat beside him. Stuart took the chair directly across, set down his coffee, folded his hands on the table. He looked completely at ease. The briefest flicker of something crossed Gerald's face. Not quite discomfort. The preliminary stage of discomfort, the moment when a person senses that the terrain is different than expected, but hasn't yet identified how. Stuart, Gerald said, with the measured warmth of a man applying warmth deliberately, I appreciate you sitting down with us. I think there may be some confusion around the evaluation notice, and I'd like to clear the air on a few things professionally. Because I think once we look at the numbers together, you'll find that Ashworth Materials has been a reliable partner for this organization, and the evaluation is standard procedure, Stuart said. It's in your contract. He paused. Section 5, paragraph B. Gerald stopped. Calibrated. Gerald tried again. I understand that. And I want to be clear that I have every confidence the evaluation will reflect what's been a mutually beneficial relationship. I also want to say that I'm aware there are some personal circumstances between our families right now, and I want to be very clear that this organization's business decisions should be completely separate from. They are separate, Stuart said. His voice was level, warm, but not placating. The same tone I'd heard him use at my kitchen table when the conversation turned to something that needed to be said carefully. This review is being conducted on the merits of your company's performance and pricing against current market benchmarks, nothing more. Gerald sat with that for a moment. His operations manager was very still beside him. Stuart opened the folder in front of him and slid a single sheet across the table. Gerald picked it up. Read it. I watched his expression from the hallway. Not dramatic, just a slow comprehension settling across his face the way weather settles. Pricing analysis. 3 product categories. Current contract rate versus market comparables from 4 regional competitors. These figures, Gerald started, are accurate, Stuart said. We've had them verified through 2 independent suppliers. He pulled a second sheet from the folder. I've also prepared a revised agreement, restructured pricing, updated delivery benchmarks, a 2-year term with a performance review at 12 months. The margins are fair. The terms are reasonable. I wrote them to be. Gerald set down the pricing sheet, picked up the new agreement, read it slowly. His operations manager leaned over and read it with him. The room was quiet except for the low sound of the yard outside, trucks moving, equipment running, the ordinary sounds of a construction company at work on a Friday afternoon. This is, Gerald said. He stopped. These terms are reasonable. I know they are. There was a silence then. The particular silence of a man who arrived expecting one kind of room and found himself in a completely different one. Gerald set the contract down on the table. He looked at Stuart with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not the careful warmth he deployed at family dinners, not the measured confidence of a man accustomed to holding the authority in a room. Something older than that, something quieter. Stuart, he said, and then he stopped, because the name on the door of the office across the hall, the one Stuart had walked out of 20 minutes ago to come and stand in this room, was the name his operations manager had just quietly read off the nameplate and set his hand on Gerald's arm to point out. Director of Supplier Relations, Stuart Wren. Stuart waited. He didn't offer Gerald the easy exit. He didn't rush to soften anything. He let the man sit inside the room he'd built for himself, with enough time to understand what he was sitting in. I think, Gerald said carefully, that I may have made some significant assumptions. I think so too, Stuart said. More silence. About your family. Gerald cleared his throat. About what? About the kind of people your family is. What your father-in-law, he stopped on the phrase which had a different texture in this room than it had in the conversations where he'd used it dismissively. Stuart let the pause run its full length. You made a phone call that cost me my position, he said finally. Not loud, not sharp. Just clear, the way something is clear when a person has had several days to decide exactly how they want to say it. You told your son's wife that staying in her marriage was incompatible with your family's expectations. You told people in this industry that I was a liability. Gerald looked at the table. And you've been a supplier to this company for 3 years, Stuart continued. The company my father-in-law built. He let that land. Nobody asked you to know that. You didn't need to know it. But I think it's important that you know it now. Another long silence. Gerald's operations manager was looking at a middle distance to the left of the window. I was wrong, Gerald said. The words came out simply, without the cushioning a man like Gerald usually wraps around an admission. Just the sentence. Undecorated. I was wrong about your family. I've been wrong about a lot of things, I think, and I've been calling it principle for long enough that I'd stopped noticing the difference. I appreciate that, Stuart said. My son. Gerald looked up. He misses her. Whatever's happened between them, he shook his head, whatever I encouraged to happen. That was wrong of me and I know it. Stuart's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, not softening exactly, but settling. The difference between a man holding himself in readiness and a man who's confirmed he no longer needs to be. Your son knows where she is, Stuart said. That conversation is between the two of them, and frankly it's between your son and his conscience, not a decision I can make or you can make for them. But your grandchildren, Gerald. He paused. Your grandchildren are going to need their grandfather, whatever that relationship looks like going forward. I hope you'll remember that. Gerald looked at him for a long moment. The contract is on the table, Stuart said. The terms are fair. I'd like to give you a few minutes to review with your operations manager before we conclude. He stood unhurried, picked up his coffee, and walked out. Walked past the doorway where I was standing. Our eyes met for exactly 1 second. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. He went back to his office, and I heard his chair, heard him pull a binder toward him, heard him get back to work. That was all. I stood in the hallway for another moment. 41 years of getting up early. Of keeping quiet when it would have been easier to talk. Of building something that had no audience and asked for none. Of driving a sensible car and living in the same house and letting the work be the thing that mattered, not the talking about the work. Gerald Ashworth had looked at my daughter and my son-in-law and decided that our name didn't carry the right kind of weight. He hadn't known whose building he'd been supplying for 3 years. He hadn't known whose name was on the contract. He hadn't known that the man who'd sat across his son's wedding reception table in a blue blazer and had second helpings of the pasta salad and laughed at the best man's jokes was the same man whose company had been quietly underwriting a piece of Gerald's quarterly revenue since the year his son graduated high school. He knew now. I walked downstairs, nodded to the receptionist, pushed through the front door into the November afternoon, the cold air carrying the particular smell of a small northern city in late fall. Exhaust and wood smoke, and something mineral from the direction of the lake. I got in my truck, the old one. The F-150 I'd been driving for 11 years, the one my operations director had been trying to convince me to replace for 3. I sat there for a moment and looked at the Caldwell Ridge sign above the door, and thought about my father in his small office in Peterborough, and the morning he'd handed me everything he had left and told me to do better with it than he'd managed to do. I thought about my daughter in the school parking lot, holding herself together between classes, asking me if I could help. I thought about Stuart at the boardroom table with his yellow legal pad and his reading glasses and his sleeves rolled up, reading binders he'd never seen before, asking the right questions. I thought about the grandchildren, who would grow up knowing that their grandfather had built something, that their parents had shown up, that the name their father-in-law had called unworthy was the name on the building they were standing in. That's the thing about legacy. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't require an audience. It just sits there, solid and quiet, and when the moment comes that somebody needs something real to stand on, it's there. It had always been there. I started the truck, pulled out of the lot, drove through Barry toward the highway, toward Port Hope, toward the workshop and the cabinet doors and the ordinary Tuesday that had become something else entirely. I turned on the radio. Johnny Cash. Appropriate. I drove south through the November gray in my old truck, from my company through my province, the same way I'd driven home for 41 years. Quietly, completely, undefeated.